right. Thank you for joining a special edition Maize Blue Review podcast. Joining us today, probably not normally introduced this way, but around these parts, he is former Michigan quarterback, current host of Crane and Company, one of the fastest rising sports talk shows in the country. And in case you're not sure he's from Georgia, he's also a country music artist. So, Mr. David Cohn, thank you for coming in, man. Glad to have you on the show finally.
Thank you so much for having me, brother.
So you've been all over my Twitter feed this week with the Sherrone Moore suspension news, specifically talking about Michigan's thoughts on this process. And you know, I've long thought the deleting text allegation was probably going to be the easiest thing for Michigan to fight because they didn't find anything incriminating. But now we get another leak and they're talking about suspending it for 2 games. Really bizarre situation, week 3 and 4. I guess give me your gut reaction and then maybe where you're at on it now after a few days of the news being out there.
Well, you know, to start the week, we had Danny Cannell on Monday, and I, did my typical due diligence and thinking like, okay, what can I talk to Danny Cannell about that'll be really interesting? Maybe can I get him all hot and bothered about something to do with the SEC or something? And then Monday morning, this news just breaks, and Danny comes on and says, well, guys, it's May, so I'm able to relax just a little bit. You know, it's the off season. I said, well, I'm glad you're able to, because here I sit and my head coach is being suspended for 2 games. I thought we had already gone through this. And then we followed that up by having Steve Dace, who, I just absolutely love Steve Dace. We formed a relationship. Obviously, he's a political pundit over at The Blaze, but I think that he does as good of a job researching college football and Michigan football as anyone in the country, and it's just his hobby. And he was kind enough to join us on a moment's notice so that we could put that out on Tuesday, and he really came in hot. And so I would encourage people to go watch both of those episodes this week. I guess I kind of want to start at the beginning because I have had an opportunity now to sit down and have a deep dive conversation with Connor Stalions. And again, I'm not just trying to plug all the episodes that we have on Crane and Company, but it seems relevant to this conversation because Connor came in person and we talked for about an hour and a half.
Great episode.
And you have to understand my perspective here. I got to play quarterback at the University of Michigan, and I told Connor there are very few instances in my profession now where I talk about sports and football for a living where it was better off to have been the signal caller than the starting quarterback. In most instances, you would rather be an All-American or a Heisman Trophy winner or an NFL Hall of Famer and have a ton of success doing this. But I sent real signals for a couple years. I sent dummy and bluff signals for a couple years. And so when this whole news started about sign stealing saga, from Pete Thamel and ESPN, sign stealing saga, so that people would click on these articles and then you find out 7 or 8 paragraphs down, well, actually, look, stealing signs is not actually against the rules.
Right.
What we're talking about is in-person scouting. But hey, we wanted you to click on it. And because it's the winningest football program in the history of the sport, obviously we're going to keep this news cycle going throughout the middle of the year, mind you, which, I think that is disappointing as well, because I think there are powers that be with the NCAA and other institutions that want the college football to have a black eye, especially right now during this time of great change with NIL and transfer portal and such. But that's a whole different conversation. So immediately I thought signal deciphering is something every single team should dedicate at least some resources to doing. Right. If you're not doing that, that's what would make me mad as a Michigan fan. We're not spending any time whatsoever to see if there's a pattern with signals. But then the in-person scouting was sort of a new thing for me. I mean, even as an 8, 9, 10-year-old playing football, I'd ask my parents, can we stay extra to watch the other team we're going to play next week? As an 8-year-old kid, I was trying to scout who we were playing next week. I didn't know in high-level college football that you couldn't watch the other team play when we have high-definition cameras that are recording every single thing that's happening on the field. But somehow a guy in the stands with a cell phone is going to get more valuable information. That seems silly to me. But rules are still rules. And so what I said in the middle of 2023, when Michigan's on this incredible run and has a realistic chance, for the first time since I've been involved with the program, a real chance to win a national championship, and all of this news is breaking, I said, okay, well, if there's a rule and someone on staff violated that, then what is the punishment for it? Or did someone on staff think they found a gray area and a loophole and they were trying to exploit that, and there's some discrepancy in the language? Or did they actually break a rule? Obviously, we can't get an answer on that. The NCAA forces the Big Ten to act, suspend Jim Harbaugh in the middle of the season. Absolutely unprecedented when the team is on the tarmac headed to Happy Valley to play Penn State. And, all of that when Michigan went on to win those final 3 games of the season in a schedule that was already backloaded, mind you. Everyone was already saying, well, Michigan's schedule is so easy, a cupcake schedule to open up, but it'll get real on the back end. Well, now it's having to get real without your head coach. For Sherrone Moore to step in there and to beat Penn State and to beat the Buckeyes and then to go on to the college football playoff, and they beat Alabama and they beat Washington for the national title. I thought the way that galvanized that team, if a team really thought they did wrong and were cheating somehow, and they got called out on it in the middle of a season, there's no way you go on and you beat everyone and you win the championship, right? So I just thought that's why I think that 2023 Michigan team was the greatest football team that in the history of the program for sure, because of how they were able to respond to that level of chaos. I don't know whether or not, I don't know what the detail is with these text messages. I don't have any inside information on if Sherrone Moore is in more trouble for having deleted the text messages or what was actually said in them before they were deleted or anything like that.
Well, we know the answer to that, though. We know there was nothing incriminating in them because there's no other allegations or violations to Sherrone Moore. They've said they were innocuous. He's called for them to be released. It's crazy.
Yes, and that's what I've heard too, which makes me wonder: is there stuff that I don't know? Like, are people like, is the NCAA holding like a card close to their vest that we don't know? Which I think gives the NCAA a little bit more credit than they deserve. And I don't mean to come down on the NCAA too hard. I think that they bring a lot of this on themselves by the lack of leadership that they provide or lack thereof, to be honest. And so when I see an institution like the University of Michigan, who, clearly in an attempt to be compliant and to be upstanding and to be worthy of the phrase, the leaders and the best, sort of bend over backwards for an institution who won't even do their job, that's where I start to get frustrated. I have no doubt that this is coming from a good place, right? That the University of Michigan, if it's Ward Manuel or if it's higher than him who are making these decisions, they want the University of Michigan to live up to that phrase, the leaders and the best. But I don't think you do so like this. I'm watching the University of Tennessee. At the first sign of the NCAA coming down on them for anything, they say, you know what, we're going to sue you, NCAA. I don't understand the concept of saying, you know what, we did something wrong, or at least you're saying that we did something wrong per your rule book. So we're going to punish ourselves and hope that somehow is enough. And if it's not, then you're going to punish us more later. That's not how any of this works. If you violate something in the NFL, you know what happens and you know the punishment that comes with it. If I accidentally run a red light because I didn't see the sign, or I turned right on red and the sign was blown down and I get pulled over and stopped, I know what happens. I know what the penalty is. I know what I have to pay. I don't have to guess. And that's why the only response I really had to this when the news broke and they said, well, Sherrone Moore is going to be suspending himself, which I don't buy for 1 second. I think Schembechler Hall and the coaching staff's being hung out to dry. I think the University of Michigan is hanging Sherrone Moore out to dry in this. But that's the only funny thing I could tweet was in future news, I'm going to be issuing my own punishments in my house after disagreeing with my wife. That's all I can do, Trevor.
Yeah, that's it. We're in line with a lot of this. And I think for me, you touched on what the bigger picture is, which is Michigan seems willing to accept punishment for what they did do wrong. Like you said, if a rule was broken, fine. We want what we would consider equitable and precedent matching punishment, right? I understand why you gave a show cause to Minter, because it sounds bad and he doesn't care because he could be a head coach in college football next year. It doesn't impact him one bit. But the narrative of the sign stealing and this massive advantage that Michigan had that was created back in the fall of 2023, the NCAA comes in, does their investigation, and they don't find any of that, right? And it's this advanced scouting. And I think, again, you brought up your show having Stallions on. The documentary wasn't going to move anybody, right, one way or the other, their opinion. But I think having him on a show like yours, people that don't like him should watch that. I think it's really enlightening what he actually was doing. And even comments like, do you really think I'm the one making all the defensive play calls? Mike McDonald's making millions of dollars a year, and you think I'm the one making the play calls, right? So, yeah, it's the battle of the narrative. And Yeah, Sherrone deleted the text. Fine. There was nothing incriminating. I don't get the issue. Clinkscale helps a kid with Instagram. He's getting a 2-year show cause. It feels like they're trying to trump up these punishments to match the narrative to give themselves power. And Michigan is kind of going along with it, to your point, with, I don't know how long they can fight. We've got the COI, hearing in June. But I guess if the NCAA does come hard on Michigan, what do they accept it? Do they sue? Like, what does that even look like? And will anybody be satisfied?
I think the precedent has been set that Michigan wants to steer clear of any conflict whatsoever. And this would never happen with an SEC school. And I don't say that. I mean, we had talked about it on our show, particularly with Danny Cannell and with Steve Dace, in the capacity of, an SEC school wouldn't do this because if they broke the rules, they'd be willing to die or to take that to their deathbed that they broke the rules. I'm not necessarily talking about that. Again, I don't want it to be true that the University of Michigan is breaking rules to gain an advantage. I don't want that to be true. I just want it, if it is true, what is the punishment? And let's put everything out in the open. Every single Saturday, there is a violation of NCAA rules in some capacity. There's a face mask. You're holding your opponent's jersey. You jump off sides. Are you cheating? No, you're not cheating. It's a violation of the rules. They throw a yellow flag. You get penalized. You accept it, and you move forward. Why can't we do the same in these instances? I've been reliably informed that a similar situation happened with Baylor football in 2016. An assistant went and scouted an opponent in person. When it was found out, that assistant was suspended for half a game. The assistant was suspended for half a game. If I'm wrong, please, someone reach out to me on social media and tell me where I'm wrong in this instance, because right now I'm looking at the University of Michigan with Jim Harbaugh being suspended not by the NCAA. It was an NCAA rule, but he's been suspended by the Big Ten for 3 games, and now he's gone. And now Sherrone Moore is being suspended by his staff, by his university, for another 2 games, all for violating NCAA rules. Where's the NCAA? Make them do their job. Again, I get so frustrated with this idea of, well, if you punish yourself hard enough, then we won't have to step in. Forget that. These are your rules, right? You're the one who supposedly has evidence that rules were broken. So step up to the table and just do your job. And this whole business about, well, and I wish I knew more about the behind the scenes and the connections and the back channeling that's going on. I mean, again, if this was part of some plea deal where the University of Michigan and the NCAA have talked behind everyone's back, and this was the be all end all of the situation, then that's one thing. But it doesn't sound like that's the case. And then for Coach Moore to sit out weeks 3 and 4. I mean, it's so weird. Like I saw someone else online said, if you get to pick when your punishment happens, then it's not a punishment, it's a vacation. It reminds me a lot of these mafia bosses who get caught and they go to jail, but really it's just this like really nice villa where they get food brought to them and cigars and such. Like, how much of a jail situation is that? So yeah, I don't know how this thing is going to end moving forward, but it's just so weird to think, yeah, we're gonna penalize our coach and it's going to be for weeks 3 and 4. At that point, why don't you just say weeks 1 and 3, right? Like if we're already able to pick our games,
the non-con home games were good.
Central Michigan and New Mexico, exactly.
Right. Well, I knew you'd have a unique perspective, obviously, and then the Danny Cannell thing stuck out to me too, because I think everybody's just exhausted. In 23, he's seeing Florida State get held out of the playoff in a unique situation because his quarterback gets hurt, and he's saying Michigan shouldn't be in the playoff, right? Because he's part of this heated, frankly, overreaction in the moment with a lack of, and now he's like, can we just be done with this? He was very punish Michigan. Now even he's like, eh. And to your point, Michigan has been punished. That gets left out. The Big Ten punished Michigan by suspending Harbaugh and said, unless anything else comes up connecting it to the coaches from the NCAA, we're not reopening the investigation. And they won the title anyway, without Harbaugh, with all the constant drips from the media. It made the championship more impressive, and the NCAA president said you can't say they didn't win it fair and square.
There's a couple really good points there. I'm going to try and hit each one of them. The first one is on Danny Cannell. We didn't have time to get into that this week. Again, this news dropped like right when we're getting mic'd up for that interview. But I would like to sit down with Danny at some point for a long form interview and just ask his perspective on this whole thing as a football guy. I mean, he played at even a higher level than I did. He understands signal deciphering and the assets that are dedicated to it more than anyone. So this idea of like you said, yeah, well, we just want Michigan punished. At that point, he wanted anything to be able to put Florida State in the playoff. Another thing you said earlier, I want to touch on about people who even hate Connor Stallions or hate Michigan and would love nothing more than if Michigan was guilty and they're going to call them cheaters for the rest of their life. That's fine. Like college football is tribal. That's in large part what makes it great. I get it. If you hate Michigan because you're a fan of a different school, like hate Michigan, but still go watch the Connor Stallions interview. And I'm not just saying that so that we get more views. I'm just saying if you really love the sport that much, please go watch that interview, because again, I sent signals, real and dummy signals, for a long time. And even I was really engaged in learning some new stuff. And it's not so much like you said about, oh, Connor Stallions has all the plays and here's what they're going to run. It's a cat and mouse game of when he's even moving his mouth. And this is what was so interesting. A lot of times he's telling the defensive coordinator, hey, I have no idea what they're signaling here. I'm just talking to you so that they'll signal first, right? Because if we can signal second, then we are at least not at a disadvantage. We've made it neutral now with these up-tempo and no-huddle offenses, which you can only signal decipher in up-tempo and no-huddle offenses. When you use a wristband like we did for most of the time when I was there with Chad Henne, and this was Lloyd Carr's offense and stuff, right? Like there's no signal deciphering because we're going to look at the wristband and we're going to huddle up. It's only when you're trying to gain an advantage as an offense by going fast and going up-tempo that this even becomes a thing. So, yeah, I agree. I would encourage anyone to go watch that interview. But your final point on, yes, Michigan has already been punished for this. That was one of the most fascinating aspects to me on this. And again, I wish I knew more of what exactly was said by the NCAA to Michigan and to ESPN and to the Big Ten in the middle of that 2023 season, like post Michigan State game, but pre Penn State game, because clearly if the NCAA had just let that season play out and Connor Stallions isn't fired, no one is fired off staff, Michigan goes on and wins the national championship 15-0, and then they drop the news after, well, you guys were actually violating, you violated a rule a long time ago on in-person scouting and getting people's signals, then that whole season would have been more tainted to me, because the accusations of, oh, you just cheated to win your championship would have been more valid. But because they blew their shot in the middle of the season saying, no, we actually have evidence you're doing a thing right now, and it's so egregious, we have to step in and we have to act now. But of course, not us. We're not going to act, but we're going to make the Big Ten act, right? That's who we're going to do. We're going to leverage your own conference in a way that, again, Greg Sankey and the SEC would never. They would laugh at that. But Tony Petitti and the Big Ten said, yeah, this is bad enough. We're going to suspend Jim Harbaugh. Because you did that and you forced Michigan to play their toughest games without their head coach, an added disadvantage, and they still won the championship. There was nothing that Charlie Baker, the NCAA president, could say after the season except what he said, which was Michigan's national championship was won fair and square.
Spot on. Yeah, in the moment you hate it, but yeah, in hindsight, you're right. I hate what they did because I don't like the precedent it sets without the investigation and everything. But they did Michigan a favor, because I'm with you. I think it'd be a lot easier to argue that it was an illegitimate title, and that you can't. Stallions wasn't there. Everybody knows they're changing their signs. Like, just can't argue it. But
to add insult to injury, Michigan beating Ohio in 24. You know, and it's like, and look, that doesn't mean that a rule wasn't broken. That doesn't mean it just is. It's further proof that all of these excuses, and again, I don't mind people from Ohio. I don't mind Buckeyes fans. Like say. When they were beating our tail, when I was there, and for the other 10 years after, what did they call us? They called us losers. So now all of a sudden that we're beating them, they don't call us winners, they call us cheaters. Well, you know what? I'd much rather be called a cheater than a loser, because they were spanking our butts year in and year out, and that was getting tiring. So when even a 7-5 team beats them in a year where Jim Harbaugh's gone, Jesse Minter's gone, Connor Stallions long gone, all the players who were drafted to the NFL after the championship season, and we still found a way to beat them in their national championship season, to me, that undoes a lot of the narrative all by itself.
It's so true. They needed that game, or at least the fan base needed that 24 game too. They thought in their mind was going to invalidate the previous 3 years. I think they really thought if we win this one, we can pretend the other 3 years didn't happen. Now it's the exact opposite. They win the Natty, and now they're just pretending they don't care about the rivalry at all, which is
which
Anyway,
that makes me sick. That makes me sick. We
call
had to
them
sit
Michigan.
there and endure that. I had to sit there and endure that every Thanksgiving. I mean, that week is different, man. My blood, I get fired up, and I had to sit there and watch us lose and lose and lose and lose because I care so much about that rivalry. As someone who's from the deep South, I didn't even grow up a Michigan fan. In fact, I grew up where my grandparents were Buckeyes fans. My mom was born in Columbus, Ohio, and I still care about that rivalry so much. To watch them now dismiss it as, well, it's not important because, you know, we can make the college football playoff. I'm a 12 team and blah, blah, blah. It's sickening, and they don't mean it. And if there are any that do mean it, they're not real Buckeyes fans anyway.
Yeah, well said. I agree. All right, let's talk a little on the field, because I do think there's a lot of exciting things about this team this year. You've got some continuity with a lot of Sherrone Moore staff coming back, a lot of players coming back, a couple of transfer portal additions. And of course, I feel like everything starts and ends with Bryce Underwood. I was at the spring game on the sideline, and I told everyone I haven't seen this level of stardom in Ann Arbor before, especially for a freshman. Jim Harbaugh arriving in 2015 was close in terms of everybody gravitating towards this one person. Bryce is at another level, and it's incredible. It feels like he's already the face of the program, but he's going to have to play games, and he's going to make mistakes, right? So what are your expectations, I guess, for – I mean, you've played quarterback. You know what goes on in the meeting rooms and practices and all the things behind the scenes to be ready on a Saturday. What do you think Bryce's biggest challenges are going to be, and what should fans' realistic expectations be? Even though, I mean, number one recruit of the country, obviously, but
yeah, everyone that I've talked to, I mean, everyone says that this kid, from a talent standpoint, is on a different level than they've even seen ever. I mean, we're talking about really ever. I mean, you're talking about like Trevor Lawrence and even going back to Chris Leak and all these guys who are like the top recruits ever. From a talent standpoint, he's just on a different level. Okay, that's great. That's a great start. But when I sat down and talked with Connor Stallions, who, remember, after this whole signal deciphering saga, he goes on and coaches Bryce Underwood in the playoff games over there at Belleville. I think it was Belleville, right? Yep. Coaches him, and he says, I've never seen a high school kid work harder in the film room and in his preparation. Well, now all of a sudden, if those two things are true, you're talking about potential that you really can't put a ceiling on. Right? I mean, it's one thing to just be the most talented guy on the field, especially as an 18-year-old and you're in high school, and you can get by with a lot of that at the next level. I played with some guys who were really talented. They didn't work hard. They didn't study that much, but God gave them a gift, and they should have played in the NFL, and they should be Hall of Famers, but they weren't, but they were still really good. I've worked with guys, on the other hand, who weren't that athletic, weren't that talented, but they work really hard, and they add value to a team, right? We've seen it all. But when you're able to do both of those things, now you're talking about a guy who can lead a team, not just to a national championship, but, you know, have sustained success throughout his career and go on to do those same sort of great things in the NFL. Now, you're still talking about having to be a week one starter as an 18-year-old and as a freshman. And we talked with Tom Luganbill about this last week over with the ACC Network, and he played quarterback at Georgia Tech. And I was really interested to hear his perspective, because we both agree that no matter how talented you are, nothing prepares you for that jump from high school to college, and in a similar way from college to the NFL. And so I think Michigan finds themselves in a really interesting spot right now. Sherrone Moore, year 2. Playing Oklahoma, week 2, his alma mater. And I told this to Coach Moore's face when we interviewed him. No one wants to win that game more than he does. And, you know, he gave a very diplomatic answer. Hey, I want to win them all. Hey, Coach, wink, wink. I get it. You want to beat Oklahoma as much as anyone. So, and I just point blank asked him, can you walk people through what the selection process will be for determining who your starting quarterback is going to be? Walk people through what it looks like in spring practice. This was before spring. And then most importantly, in fall camp, when you really decide. And obviously Mikey Keene, who transferred in from Fresno State, was hurt for, was it all of spring practice, or at least the majority, right?
Yeah, he's starting to throw now,
Okay, he won't get a chance until fall camp. I think that after this spring, it seems like all indicators are that Bryce Underwood is going to be the week 1 starter. And of course, that's going to come with certain challenges. And I wonder, in year 2 of Sherrone Moore's tenure, you know, what can the ceiling be? What would the floor be with someone as talented as we expect Bryce Underwood to be, but still going to be a freshman in the Big Ten, by the way, playing in one of the premier conferences in college football. So ceiling, floor, but then also expectation. Again, by beating the Buckeyes and by beating Alabama last year in the final 2 games of the season, it was almost like, this team really went 8-5. I don't feel that upset about it, right? Like normally if your team goes 8-5
ever.
it's the greatest 8-5 season ever, which hurts to say, and it doesn't feel right to say. But again, if you're going to draw up, okay, your team has to go 8-5, how would you draw it up? Well, beating the national champions and then beating Alabama when all their starters are playing and ours weren't, that's a pretty good way to do it. So, look, I don't know if this is going to be a college football playoff team if Bryce Underwood is starting. I don't know. Maybe he's so talented they just win the national championship and he's the greatest thing we've ever seen, and he's Cam Newton right off the bat and Wink Martindale leading this defense. They don't give up any points, right? Like anything is possible. I would rather see a situation like Florida in 2006, to be honest, with Tim Tebow coming in with all that hype, adds value in packages behind another high recruit, Chris Leak, under Urban Meyer, and they win the national championship. That would be a much better recipe. Obviously, Michigan is not dealing with that situation right now. So we just have to see, how can this kid handle the moment if he's going to start as a freshman for the entire season.
Yeah, I mean, getting Bryce was a big part of that big momentum finish as well, but it was also a correction to the misses of the QB recruiting in the years before and left them in the spot that you're talking about. So, all right, we're over what we said we were going to do, so I appreciate you, but I did have to ask you one question, not football. I couldn't let it go because, again, I know you do country music. So I need you to tell me, fellow guitar player, why is the Fender Telecaster the greatest guitar ever made?
I do love my Fender Telecaster, man. I had a Strat at one point too, and on the acoustic side, I play Martin. I really love Martin. But yeah, do you have a Tele?
I think there's 4 guitars you have to own: Tele, Strat, 335, and a Les Paul.
Yeah, Paul. My Les Paul is turquoise right now, which I really enjoy playing.
If I had to grab just one, though, it's funny because feature-wise, it's so simple. Right, I think it would be the Tele. First solid body guitar. They got it right out the gate in 1950. Man, it's just such a good instrument.
When you strap on the Tele, you feel it, right? I mean,
yes.
it's and I have a Gretsch. I have a Gretsch hollow body too, and it's cool in different ways to play. I love all of them, right? But when you strap on a Tele, it does feel different. And I appreciate you talking about my music. When I was at Michigan, I was primarily listening to hip hop music, and I would make hip hop songs with a lot of my teammates, and that was a lot of fun. But up there, I started to get a little bit more, in touch with my roots where I'm from, which is traditional classic country, which my parents had listened to, but also folk music and classic rock and roll, Elvis and Chuck Berry, a lot of things that kind of fit into, they're like classic country adjacent, right? So I have a lot of musical influences. And when I moved to Nashville, which when we moved the show here in 2022, I thought, man, I've got all this, and I've been writing music. I started writing music like a couple weeks after I graduated from Michigan. I really, with no more football, a lot of these creative endeavors poured out of me, and it wasn't always country music. It was a lot more like John Mayer. People would come to my shows in Atlanta and say it sounded a lot like Jack Johnson and Jimmy Buffett type stuff, which was cool. But now that I'm in Nashville and I've gotten older and I have kids and I have a family, everything seems to be steeped in this like Americana rootsy type vibe. And while I don't sing necessarily with the biggest country twang, I think it for sure fits into the country music category. And I just wanted to say I'm recording a brand new album next Tuesday. We start tracking with Mr. Kent Wells. He's Dolly Parton's producer right here in Nashville on Music Row. And we hope to release that the very 1st of August. So hopefully I'll have a bunch of new tracks coming for you soon.
Good for you, man. That's awesome. Let me know when that happens. I'll push that for you for sure.
Thank you.
I was never a country guy, but there's just if you like guitar, there's not a lot of rock bands anymore. And if you want guitar music, it's country, right? And even if it's like a Stapleton guy who doesn't necessarily, like you said, do the twang, but it's still country, right? And it's good to hear guitar music. All right.
Well,
I'm gonna give you another.
You like Credence and Skynyrd and Eagles, right? That vibe.
Yeah. So I was really fortunate growing up. My dad was Zeppelin, Floyd, all the go-tos. But I'm like a year or two older than you. So like my music was all the like hip hop, new metal stuff in the 90s. But now that I'm older and I'm going back to listen to music, it's not necessarily my music I'm listening to. It's my dad's music, or I started listening to Bob Dylan, which was something I never enjoyed as I was younger. But now, I don't know if it's because the movie came out or whatever, but I'm just being drawn towards different kind of music than I ever have. So, all right, before we go, give you one more chance to plug everything you're doing. Obviously, I know you're super busy with Crane & Company, but let people know where to find you.
Yeah, please check out our show, Crane & Company. It's on the Daily Wire Network here. We have a YouTube channel. Please check out all the content we're putting out. You can follow me at David Adam Cohn on Twitter, on Instagram, anywhere that they have a platform these days. I think we have representation. And then since you brought up my music, please, anyone who has Spotify or Apple Music or YouTube or anything, I'd really appreciate it if you would go check out my songs. And if you hear anything you like, please share it with a friend.
Absolutely. I've been hesitant to talk about this stuff, and I knew you'd be the perfect guy, and you hit a home run, man. I really appreciate your perspective on all of this. So thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Everybody, thank you for coming on. Special edition Maize Blue Review podcast. Make sure to follow us over at michigan.rivals.com and on the YouTube channel, Maize Blue Review. Thank you.